All right. So hi. This is the first class in this Maya animation training. Um, the last time I just gave you an intro to what we'll be doing, but today we'll get into um the real course itself and start with basics. Always start with the basics. All right. So this is the Maya interface. For people who are not conversant with this environment, it will tend to look a little bit confusing and disorienting. I know it did for me when I first saw it. Yeah. Um, and then when I started using it, it didn't even have this gray tone that they have now. It had more of the lighter gray tone, and that kind of made things jump at you more. These darker gray tones at least make stuff you see, and it's basically pretty much a lot better than that first one. Yeah. All right. So we're going to be talking about this interface and how to get around and get to do a few things. Uh, um, so we're going to talk about some of these areas at the top here that you can see, some of the areas below at the sides, all of these areas. We're going to talk about them um, in a bit of a detail, but not too much. Yeah, so because we don't, the idea here is not to bog you down with the details, it's to get you to understand what's going on so you can feel confident to do more. Yeah. So I will just take you through a few of the areas that we have here. So that we can get started. First of all, there is a menu bar at the top here. You can see this very line at the top here with menus. You can see that they all drop down. It's a lot of menus, it's a lot of options. Don't get confused by all the number of options that you see here. You understand which you need the most as you get familiar with the software. Alright, so that's the menu bar at the top. There is the status line, which is the next line here. This second line that I'm tracking my mouse um around. Yeah, it contains a few things that help you do more with the objects that you have in the scene. There's the shelf. All right, this line over here with the tabs on the top, you can see that each tab has some pre-configured actions that you can do. It's basically a place in which Maya gives you the ability to compress uh, tasks that get done frequently into icons so that those icons just run that action every time you want to do it. Yeah, and you can see there's even a last one here. It says custom, which means you can add your own stuff to it. This is some of my own stuff. So actions that I think I use repeatedly, I can pull up the code for it, pull up the script for it, and put it in a form that I can always run that same task every time. Yeah. Alright, so there's the workspace or panel. Yeah. This area where you are, this is where we really do work. Right. You may start with one, but you can have as many as four or even more. Yeah, in that same space. But this is where we work. This is where we do stuff. This is the area where things get made, as it were. You have the channel box at the side. There are three major side areas that you have here in Maya. There's obviously depending on the customization that you may have done to your own, you can add a lot more there, but there's these three major ones. That's the channel box. Yeah, channel box. This gives you information about the object that you have and the node and the attributes that you can edit about that node or that object. Yeah. So we'll talk about them much later as we get into working with actual 3D objects. Yeah, but there's this area, the channel box area. There's some other stuff that I have customized and added to my own sidebar. But this these two are the most important. Your attributes editor in the channel box. You will find that sometimes they do the same thing, but not all the time. So you will get used to what works where and so on. Yeah. So you also have a time or range slider at the bottom here. This is how you move through time depending on whatever number of frames per second that you have set. Every hello, hello. Okay, so this is the range or time slider. This is how you go through time. At this time, as it affects working in a frame per second based environment, if I can use that word. So this is how you move through time. This sets the range of time that you can see at any point in time in the animation. This can go as high as you want to. If I had 2000 frames to work with, I can set 2000 there, and I can still set it to something smaller so that at any point in time, my time slider only shows just a small amount of frames. So if I set 200 frames here, at any time I can only play through 200 frames. Yeah, I can only play, and then I can move this range slider to move into any other range that I want, and you will see some feedback about which range or which frames you are at now and what range of frames you can access play through. Yeah? So that's that. There's the toolbox on the left of my screen, and you use that um, to perform some of the most rudimentary basic tasks in any scene. That's your move tool, that's your rotation tool over there, that's your scale tool over there. These are some selection tools right here at the top here. So these are just stuff that you use to affect the objects that you already have in the scene and their orientation. You can use that one. There's the layer editor, which is basically something that you see under the channel box. If you use Photoshop a bit, you understand the concept of layers. So you can do something close to that in Maya 2, where you put certain objects in different layers so that you can toggle visibility, toggle what you can do, how you can edit them, and it just helps you to group stuff up in a scene, especially when you are dealing with a heavy scene and you need to just make your workspace lighter and better navigable. Um, all right, so there's also command line, which is here. Well, you may not be, if you are not good at Mel programming, which is a programming language that is uh, used at the base of Maya, which is also some um, variation or version of Python script. If you if you don't know that stuff, then you probably don't need this line at all. But if you do, and you have gone through a bit of study and you understand what to do, you can run your own custom scripts in this space on your scene or on your workspace. The help line at the bottom just helps you to create a consistent, or should I say continuous feed of tips about icons that you are selecting or hovering over. It's a lot of help for people who don't understand what everything means and need to find something as to over stuff. That helpline continues to show you information about what the menu or tool that you are talking about, what it does at any given time. Yeah, so important elements. To show you something like this, just to give you a recap of what we have talked about just now. There's menu bar at the top, as you can see. There's a status line, which is here, which helps to select the modes or status of your workspace at any given time, or the elements inside it. There's the shelf. It just helps to condense frequently actions into sort of icons or bookmarks of that action, so that you can always return directly and do that action every time you click the button. There's our workspace, which is where we do all the work. There's channel box, where we work through attributes of the nodes that we are currently working with. There's a layer editor, which is something close to a layer um, paradigm that is in Photoshop. There's a time slider, which is how we move through time. There's the command line, where you can run your own scripts. There's the helpline, where you can see a bit of a hint as to what icons and actions mean. There's finally our toolbox, which is um, a a line of tools and menus that um, use to affect the objects in your home scene. All right, so let's go further and about the XYZ coordinates. Um, this is the bedrock of all 3D talk, if I can use that word. Without understanding 3D space, you can't work in 3D. Yeah, and we already know, I'm going to assume that if you understand what 3D means in terms of how there's not just length or breadth or height, there's also depth. Yeah, and those concepts are condensed into three axes that represent the direction, if I can say, these are the directions of space, as it were. So we have the X, we have the Y, we have the Z. And in Maya, those are represented uh, within the workspace with this small icon at the bottom here. Yeah, this XYZ. So this this gives you a continuous speed as you move through the space. It gives you a continuous speed of the direction that you are in respect to the world axis. We can use that. The world axis is the general axis of this space. So we have picked that in my X represents this axis represented by this line on this grid. The Z is represented by this other line that runs um, perpendicular to it, and then our Y is the space that runs above and runs up into or down, as it may as it may as depending on what you are doing. Yeah, so that is important. And in Maya, those axes are also represented with colors, where red is for the X axis, Y is represented with the green color, and your Z axis, which is your depth axis, is represented with your blue um it's blue color. Right, everything that you will do in this space, especially when they as regards to axis, will always be represented by those colors. So if I were to create um just do something quickly here, to create a box, a sphere, and say a cone, yeah, all in 3D space. Yeah, all line on our plane. Yeah, this when you start Maya, you should always see a plane made up of a grid with a thick line representing the x and z axis, so that you have an origin at the center here. This origin is important so that you know the reference point for the world that you are in, the virtual world that you are in. All right, so you can see that when I select this square object, you see that Maya also gives us this color codes to represent the direction, um, the placement of this object relative to the world that you are in. The same thing with the cone, the same thing with the square. When you try and to select rotation, you can see that the same colors are used to represent the axis that you are. So this red represents rotation across our x-axis, which is in this direction. The blue represents rotation across the z-axis, um, and the green represents rotation around or across the y-axis. All right. Um, Same thing for scale. You can see the same colors are used to represent um, scaling in the y-axis, um, scaling in the z-axis, yeah, and scaling in the x-axis. Already, you may be able to begin to imagine the kind of things that you can do with that, knowing where your center is at any point in time, and knowing around what axis you are moving or rotating stuff. Um, so I think I advise that you um, get comfortable with working and identifying those colors and what they do for time. Okay, so let's talk about menu sets. Uh, at the top here, below your first menu bar, you can see a drop down called menu set menu. Yeah, it's sort of a way in which Maya has modularized all the things that you can do. This it is needless to say that this software can do quite a lot of things, and so it can get confusing if they allow us to see all of it at once. So instead, they have modularized the areas of work, if I can use that word to describe this. And so you can see if I click that, you have animation, you have polygon, which is basically saying polygon modeling, surface and NURBS surface modeling, dynamics, um, rendering. You can see end dynamics and a customized tab if you want to do stuff by yourself. All right. We are not doing that now. So you can see all these tabs, all these correspond to certain sections, and you can see at the very top that as we change that, our top level menu also changes and adds more menus to our menu bar at the top. So animate has actions and menus that have to do with animation, um, scanning, constraints, and deformers, and so on. Um, Polygon has information about, or not information, actions and menu uh, menus that have to do with creating, editing a polygon mesh, UVing, and so on. Surface has to do with um, creating curves, creating surfaces from curves, and so on. Dynamics talks about or adds menus for actions that have to do with creating dynamic effects of particle effects of water, rain, cloth, collision, and so on. Rendering has actions that have to do with rendering out stuff from Maya and formatting, or how will I put it? Um, Changing the look, if I can use that, changing the look of renders or stuff that needs to go out of or that needs to be part of the visual reproduction from what has been created in the workspace. So get conversant with that and go through them and see how see the different things that come with each menu set. Um, so I did this quickly, but I'm going to go back and show how to create objects, because when you are creating objects, you cannot begin to work in the scene. Right, I'm deleting that so I can do it. There are basically three ways to do it, yeah, and all three ways, or two of those ways, use the menus and the shelf that I've already shown you um, before. The first one, you can go and say create polygon primitive cube. What I've done is almost like the third way of doing it, but usually if I did polygon create and I double clicked, it gives me a cube on the surface by itself instantly. Yeah, so that's the first way, by saying polygon, by saying create anything you want. If it is light, if it's the locator, whatever it is, you come to create polygon and then double click, or you can and do this other one, um, use this other method as we have shown. Yeah. In previous versions, in newer versions, obviously it looks like clicking does not create the cube by itself. You have to draw it, but drawing is an interactive way that makes it easier for you. So it's simply a process of let's do that again, cube. So you draw your first base of this shape on the floor, and then you set up the height by dragging upwards. So you drag on the grid to create the base, and then drag upwards to indicate any height for that object. The second method has to do with options that our shelf gives us. Yeah, so a shelf gives us, you can click that and you then can do the same thing that I've done before. Click, drag, and then drag again. All these methods create square objects in the scene that you can then work with. So let's talk about the status line. Um, Apart from the menu set, selection drop down box, which I have talked about, there are also some other actions that you perform that have to do with objects in the scene and selections. So the first three have to do with saving, opening, and creating a new scene. This next section, you can see this line. Take note of this line for later. This next section has to do with the selection mode of your the selection mode that you are in a scene. There are a few different places that you can be. So there's selection by component types, in which you can then pick whether you want to pick the vertex or the of the object, or the um, edges of the object, or the faces of the object, and so on and so forth. So this goes through that. You can then change back to object mode, where um, you only select by the objects in the scene. So this section is called the selection mode. Um, of selecting things. You use that. The next is a selection mask, which just helps us to select when you are in and you have picked select by component type. You can then pick which of these types you want to select. Yeah. So that's what it's kind of a filter for the component selection that you have picked. So there's that. There's also a snap mode icons, which just select how or what how you snap to the grid of the plane or the 3D workspace that you are in. So you can see there is snapping to grid, snapping to curve, snap to point, and if we do, let's try snap to grid. That way, as you click, you notice that it moves in steps. The steps are they are separated by the grid lines that are in the scene. These lines. So that is what this object is using to move. This is important or useful when you want to only move in certain steps. You don't want the um, free-handed movement that the object gives you. You want to move exactly in steps of grid lines. This is useful when you are trying to center. Let me show you something that this is useful for. So this is our top view, and I want to try and make this object come to the origin. Before I could have been here, but then as I snap to a grid and then I move it aligns to each grid as I drag, and then I can also drag this way. And then I am sure when I get to the center or the origin, I'm sure that I am at the exact origin, not a few units to the left or the right. I'm sure I'm at the exact origin because I've snapped to the grid lines. Finally, there's at the other end of the window, there's the show or hide attribute editor section where I can select the kind of things or the sidebars that show on my right. So this shows the attribute editor. This hides it. This hides um, the tool editor or tool settings. This shows it. This hides the channel box. This shows the channel box. All right. So you can use either of these to show all three, like you'll see here, or to just show one, depending on what you are doing at that particular time and what is most important that you're doing. I keep all three there so I can just select either one I want. But depending on what you're working on and what works for you, you can do it differently. All right. So we talked about the shelf. I just need to go back and then just show you a bit more about it. And like I said, it is a compacted layer of actions that frequently use actions that the code folk at Maya have put together in shelves so that you can just, if you need actions that have to do with a certain kind of task, you know where to find not all, but a few of the most frequently used ones. So for there's a general section here that has actions for learning, for opening some of the windows that are important to seeing the nodes in your scene. For curves, there are frequent actions like creating a circular curve, creating a square, creating a curve on the surface, and so on. Cutting, attaching curves. For surfaces, the same thing. How to actions that um so that show how to uh, or run scripts rather that perform these actions. So there's a couple of them all over that do very different things. And like I was explaining at the beginning, you can even add your own custom attributes. These ones have there scripts that I run to select all the controls on the character. So when I click that, I can select all the controls on my character. Um, so I can show you the script that is run. You can see this is the script that is run when I select that icon, but it just gives me a very piecemeal way of selecting it and doing the action without having to redo everything that I did to create it. So it's not just that you can you use it to run one action, you can use it to compile a lot of actions that you do and use and put it so that you can always do that those series of actions once by clicking on an icon that has been set up by you. So it's something that is very useful, very important if you are trying to get through stuff and do some stuff fast. Um, Something to note. Yeah, you can always also see the tool tips on each of them and show what this stuff is supposed to do. When you create your own, you can also add in tool tips that show what you're supposed to do. I've named this one's Hulk and Atom, yeah, because that's the name of the guy I've given to the characters I'm using. But you can always do something different with yours. That's the flexibility that you give. Yeah. So one other thing, I'm sure you have noticed how um, when I select an object, you see this green outline around it. That's to show you that it is selected. So that in a scene with multiple things, whenever you select, apart from seeing the um, move handlebars here, you can always also know what you have selected because there's always a green outline. And you're selecting more than one thing, so I'm holding shift and selecting this, and I'm holding shift and I'm clicking on this last one. Now I've selected all three. This is Maya shows us that I have three selected by showing a white outline on the other on the other stuff that I've selected, but always puts the green on the last selected object so that you can still know that while all these are selected, this was the last one selected. And this also represents the axis around which movement or rotation or scaling will happen to the selection that you have made. So keep that in mind when you want to select multiple stuff in your scene. If I select just one thing by clicking on it, I see a red outline. But as soon as I try and select more by holding shift and clicking on the other stuff I want to select, I see the white outline showing that they are all selected, but they are not the current item or the last item that was selected. Alright, so like another thing that I should show, I was explaining earlier that channel box will always give you attributes about the object that you selected. So you can see it translates information, translates suggesting the movement of that object from the center or the of axis or the origin. In this case, the origin is at that point here, at this point, yeah, at this point. But sometimes the center of origin may be a different place. That's the beauty of the 3D of a 3D software as opposed to the world, is that you can move your center to something else that is more appropriate. In that case, the information here will represent the movement or the distance between the object or the center of the object and that origin, wherever it may be. You can see rotate information that um, gives you details of how of the rotation, the degree of rotation that you are experiencing. You can also enter in your own stuff yourself and that um see that entry affect the object in your scene. Yeah. Scale will always default to 1, but you can change it to something else and again see the results of that change affect your object. That doesn't mean you can't still move with your handles um, stuff, but it just shows you that apart from being able to use the handles that are shown to you in the software to move the objects around and change stuff, you can also use the information that is made available in the attribute editor. One last one that you can always also see on most objects when you have created them is visibility. So you can determine whether you can see them or not by entering 0 or off in that space. If I enter on again, then I can see them. On or 1 represents um, a on state, which is the boolean, 1 being the boolean value for on in this case, and 0 being the boolean value for off in this case. So that's that. Um, that's a bit of an overview of the interface. There's still quite a lot that you will learn and come in contact with. And the idea is to be open-minded enough to accept or receive the things that you will have to learn as you get better with the software. So finally, to save a file, I can just come to my file menu, which doesn't change usually. You notice that this first 3 or first 5 or 6 do not change usually. Yeah. Um, when you select menu sets, this from starting from here they change to reflect the menu set that you're in, but this 5 or 6 first ones don't change. So I go to file and I can do save the file and save with a name, whatever name you want to save it with, and save it and say test 1. Then I can save as. Yeah, and you can always control S anytime within how you're working to save your file. It's an important part of any software these days to understand and learn how to save as frequently as possible. If you close the software and you have not saved, let me just move it so that it registers and edit. If you try and close the software, it will always ask you if you should save the position first. If you have saved and then you close, it won't bring this up. But if you have not saved, it will ask you to save. So I click save and then it closes up. So um, that's the basic Maya interface. Um, we'll go on to a few more in